He called softly, and immediately Mablung and Damrod stepped out of the trees and came back to him.
"Blindfold these guests,"
said Faramir.
"Securely, but not so as to discomfort them. Do not tie their hands. They will give their word not to try and see. I could trust them to shut their eyes to their own accord, but eyes will blink if the feet stumble. Lead them so they do not falter."
With green scarves, the 2 guards now bound up the hobbits' eyes and drew their hoods down almost to their mouths. Then quickly they took each one by the hand and went on their way. All that Frodo and Sam knew of this last mile of the road they learned from guessing in the dark. After a little they found that they were on a path descending steeply. Soon it grew so narrow that they went in single file, brushing a stony wall on either side. Their guards steered them from behind with hands laid firmly on their shoulders. Now and again they came to rough places and were lifted from their feet for a while, and then set down again. Always the noise of the running water was on their right hand, and it grew nearer and louder. At length they were halted. Quickly Mablung and Damrod turned them about several times, and they lost all sense of direction. They climbed upwards a little. It seemed cold, and the noise of the stream had become faint. Then they were picked up and carried down many steps, and round a corner. Suddenly they heard the water again, loud now, rushing and splashing. All round them it seemed, and they felt a fine rain on their hands and cheeks. At last they were set on their feet once more. For a moment they stood so, half fearful, blindfold, not knowing where they were, and no one spoke. Then came the voice of Faramir close behind.
"Let them see,"
he said. The scarves were removed and their hoods drawn back, and they blinked and gasped. They stood on a wet floor of polished stone, the doorstep, as it were, of a rough-hewn gate of rock opening dark behind them. But in front a thin veil of water was hung, so near that Frodo could have put an outstretched arm into it. It faced westward. The level shafts of the setting sun behind beat upon it, and the red light was broken into many flickering beams of ever-changing color. It was as if they stood at the window of some elven tower, curtained with threaded jewels of silver and gold, and ruby, sapphire, and amethyst, all kindled with an unconsuming fire.
"At least by good chance we came at the right hour to reward you for your patience,"
said Faramir.
"This is the window of the sunset, Henneth Anun, fairest of all the falls of Ithilien, land of many fountains. Few strangers have ever seen it, but there is no kingly hall behind to match it. Enter now and see."
Even as he spoke, the sun sank, and the fire faded into flowing water. They turned and passed under the low, forbidding arch. At once they found themselves in the rock chamber, wide and rough, with an uneven stooping roof. A few torches were kindled and cast a dim light on the glistening walls. Many men were already there. Others were still coming in by 2s and 3s through a dark, narrow door on one side. As their eyes grew accustomed to the gloom, the hobbits saw that the cave was larger than they had guessed, and was filled with great store of arms and victual.
"Well, here is our refuge,"
said Faramir.
"Not a place of great ease, but here you may pass the night in peace. It is dry at least, and there is food, though no fire. At one time the water flowed down through this cave and out of the arch, but its course was changed further up the gorge by workmen of old, and the stream sent down in a fall of doubled height over the rocks far above. All the ways into this grot were then sealed against the entry of water or aught else. All save one. There are now but 2 ways out. That passage yonder by which you entered blindfold, and through the window curtain into the deep bowl filled with knives of stone. Now rest a while until the evening meal is set."
The hobbits were taken to a corner and given a low bed to lie on, if they wished. Meanwhile men busied themselves about the cave, quietly and in orderly quickness. Light tables were taken from the walls and set up on trestles and laden with gear. This was plain and unadorned for the most part, but all well and fairly made. Round platters, bowls and dishes of glazed brown clay or turned boxwood, smooth and clean. Here and there was a cup or basin of polished bronze, and a goblet of plain silver was set by the captain's seat in the middle of the inmost table. Faramir went about among the men, questioning each as he came in a soft voice. Some came back from the pursuit of the Southrons. Others, left behind as scouts near the road, came in latest. All the Southrons had been accounted for, save only the great Mumak, What happened to him none could say. Of the enemy no movement could be seen. Not even an orc spy was abroad.
You saw and heard nothing, Unborn?
Faramir asked of the latest comer.
Well, no, Lord.
Said the man.
No orc, at least. But I saw, or thought I saw, something a little strange. It was getting deep dusk, where the eyes make things greater than they should be. So perhaps it may have been no more than a squirrel.
Sam pricked up his ears at this.
Yet if so, it was a black squirrel. I saw no tail. 'Twas like a shadow on the ground, and it whisked behind a tree trunk when I drew nigh and went up aloft as swift as any squirrel could. You will not have us slay wild beasts for no purpose, and it seemed no more, so I tried no arrow.
It was too dark for sure shooting anyway, and the creature was gone into the gloom of the leaves in a twinkling.
But I stayed for a while, for it seemed strange, and then I hastened back, though I heard the thing hissing at me from high above as I turned away. A large squirrel, maybe, perhaps under the shadow of the unnamed. Some of the beasts of Mirkwood are wandering hither in our woods. They have black squirrels there, 'tis said.
Perhaps, said Faramir.
But that would be an ill omen if it were so. We do not want the escapes of Mirkwood in Ithilien.
Sam fancied that he gave a swift glance towards the hobbits as he spoke, but Sam said nothing. For a while he and Frodo lay back and watched the torchlight, and the men moving to and fro speaking in hushed voices. Then suddenly Frodo fell asleep. Sam struggled with himself, arguing this way and that.
He may be all right, he thought, and then he may not. Fair speech may hide a foul heart.
He yawned.
I could sleep for a week, and I'd be better for it. What can I do if I do keep awake? Me all alone, and all these great men about. Nothing, Sam Gamgee, but you've got to keep awake all the same.
And somehow he managed it. The light faded from the cave door, and the grey veil of falling water grew dim and was lost in gathering shadow. Always the sound of the water went on, never changing its note, morning or evening or night. It murmured and whispered of sleep. Sam stuck his knuckles in his eyes. Now more torches were being lit. A cask of wine was broached. Storage barrels were being opened. Men were fetching water from the fall. Some were laving their hands in basins. A wide copper bowl and a white cloth were brought to Faramir, and he washed.
Wake our guests,
he said,
and take them water. It is time to eat.
Frodo sat up and yawned and stretched. Sam, not used to being waited on, looked with some surprise at the tall man who bowed, holding a basin of water before him.
Put it on the ground, master, if you please,
he said.
Easier for me and you.
Then, to the astonishment and amusement of the men, he plunged his head into the cold water and splashed his neck and ears.
Is it a custom in your land to wash the head before supper?
Said the man who waited on the hobbits.
No, before breakfast,
said Sam.
But if you're short of sleep, cold water on the neck's like rain on the wilted lettuce. There, now I can keep awake long enough to eat a bit.
They were led to the seats beside Faramir, barrels covered with pelts, and high enough above the benches of the men for their convenience. Before they ate, Faramir and all his men turned and faced the west in a moment of silence. Faramir signed to Frodo and Sam that they should do likewise.
So we always do,
he said, and they sat down.
We look towards Númenor that was, and beyond to Elvenhome that is, and to that which is beyond Elvenhome, and will ever be. Have you no such custom at meat?
No,
said Frodo, feeling strangely rustic and untutored.
But if we are guests, we bow to our host, and after we have eaten, we rise and thank him.
That we do also, said Faramir. After so long journeying and camping, and days spent in the lonely wild, the evening meal seemed a feast to the hobbits. To drink pale yellow wine, cool and fragrant, and eat bread and butter, and salted meats, and dried fruits, and good red cheese, with clean hands and clean knives and plates. Neither Frodo nor Sam refused anything that was offered, nor a second, nor indeed a third helping. The wine coursed in their veins and tired limbs, and they felt glad and easy of heart as they had not done since they had left the land of Lorien. When all was done, Faramir led them to a recess at the back of the cave, partly screened by curtains, and a chair and 2 stools were brought there. A little earthenware lamp burned in a niche.
You may soon desire to sleep,
he said,
and especially good Samwise, who would not close his eyes before he ate. Whether for fear of blunting the edge of a noble hunger, or for fear of me, I do not know. But it is not good to sleep too soon after meat, and that following a fast. Let us talk a while. On your journey from Rivendell there must have been many things to tell, and you too would perhaps wish to learn something of us and the lands where you now are. Tell me of Boromir, my brother, and of old Mithrandir, and of the fair people of Lothlorien.
Frodo no longer felt sleepy, and he was willing to talk. But though the food and wine had put him at his ease, he had not lost all his caution. Sam was beaming and humming to himself, but when Frodo spoke he was at first content to listen, only occasionally venturing to make an exclamation of agreement. Frodo told many tales, yet always he steered the matter away from the quest of the company and from the ring, enlarging rather on the valiant part Boromir had played in all their adventures, with the wolves of the wild, in the snows and the Caradhras, and in the mines of Moria, where Gandalf fell. Faramir was most moved by the story of the fight on the bridge.
"It must have irked Boromir to run from orcs," he said, "or even from the fell thing you name, the Balrog, even though he was the last to leave."
"He was the last," said Frodo, "but Aragorn was forced to lead us. He alone knew the way after Gandalf's fall, but had there not been us lesser folk to care for, I do not think that either he or Boromir would have fled."
"Maybe it would have been better had Boromir fallen there with Mithrandir," said Faramir, "and not gone on to the fate that waited above the falls of Rauros."
"Maybe. But tell me now of your own fortunes," said Frodo,
turning the matter aside once again.
"For I would learn more of Minas Ithil and Osgiliath and Minas Tirith the long-enduring. What hope have you for that city in your long war?"
"What hope have we?" said Faramir. "It is long since we had any hope. The sword of Elendil, if it returns indeed, may rekindle it, but I do not think that it will do more than put off the evil day, unless other help, unlooked for, also comes, from elves or men, for the enemy increases, and we decrease. We are a falling people, a springless autumn. The men of Númenor were settled far and wide on the shores and seaward regions of the great lands, but for the most part they fell into evils and follies. Many became enamored of the darkness and the black arts. Some were given over wholly to idleness and ease, and some fought amongst themselves, until they were conquered in their weakness by the wild men. It is not said that the evil arts were ever practiced in Gondor, or that the Nameless One was ever named in honor there, and the old wisdom and beauty brought out of the West remained long in the realm of the sons of Elendil the Fair, and they lingered there still. Yet even so it was Gondor that brought about its own decay, falling by degrees into dotage, and thinking that the enemy was asleep, who was only banished, not destroyed. Death was ever present, because the Númenóreans still, as they had in their old kingdom, had so lost it. Hungered after endless life unchanging. Kings made tombs more splendid than the houses of the living, and counted old names in the rows of their descent dearer than the names of sons. Childless lords sat in aged halls, musing on heraldry. In secret chambers withered men compounded strong elixirs, or in high cold towers asked questions of the stars. And the last king of the line of Anarion had no heir. But the stewards were wiser and more fortunate. Wiser, for they recruited the strength of our people from the sturdy folk of the sea-coast and from the hardy mountaineers of Ered Nimrais. And they made a truce with the proud peoples of the north, who often had assailed us, men of fierce valor, but our kin from afar off, unlike the wild Easterlings or the cruel Haradrim. So it came to pass in the days of Cirion the 12th Steward, and my father is the 26th, that they rode to our aid, and at the great field of Celebrant they destroyed our enemies that had seized our northern provinces. These are the Rohirrim, as we name them, masters of horses, and we ceded to them the fields of Calenardon that are since called Rohan, for that province had long been sparsely peopled, and they became our allies, and have ever proved true to us, aiding us at need, and guarding our northern marches and the gap of Rohan. Of our law and manners they have learned what they would, and their lords speak our speech at need. Yet for the most part they hold by their ways of their own fathers, and to their own memories, and they speak among themselves their own north tongue. And we love them. Tall men and fair women, valiant both alike, golden-haired, bright-eyed and strong. They remind us of the youth of men, as they were in elder days. Indeed, it is said by our law masters that they have from of old this affinity with us, that they are come from those same 3 houses of men as there were the Númenóreans in their beginning. Not from Hador, the golden-haired, the elf friend, maybe, yet from such of his sons and peoples as went not over the sea into the west, refusing the call. For so we reckon men in our law, calling them the High, or men of the west, which were Númenóreans, and the middle peoples, men of the twilight, such as are the Rohirrim and their kin that dwell still far in the north, and the wild, the men of darkness. Yet now if the Rohirrim are grown in some ways more like to us, enhanced in arts and gentleness, we too have become more like to them. We can scarce claim any longer the title High. We are become middlemen, of the twilight, but with memory of other things. For, as the Rohirrim do, we now love war and valor as things good in themselves, both a sport and an end. And though we still hold that the warrior should have more skills and knowledge than only the craft of weapons and slaying, we esteem a warrior, none the less, above men of other crafts. Such is the need of our days. So even was my brother, Boromir, a man of prowess, and for that he was accounted the best man in Gondor. And very valiant indeed he was. No heir of Minas Tirith has for long years been so hardy in toil, so onward into battle, or blown a mightier note on the great horn.
Faramir sighed and fell silent for a while.
You don't say much in all your tales about the elves, sir,
said Sam, suddenly plucking up courage. He had noted that Faramir seemed to refer to elves with reverence, and this even more than his courtesy, and his food and wine had won Sam's respect and quieted his suspicions.
No indeed, Master Samwise,
said Faramir,
for I am not learned in elven lore. But there you touch upon another point in which we have changed, declining from Númenor to Middle-earth. For as you may know, if Mithrandir was your companion and you have spoken with Elrond, the Edain, the fathers of the Númenóreans, fought beside the elves in the first wars, and were rewarded by the gift of the kingdom in the midst of the sea, within sight of elven home. But in Middle-earth, men and elves became estranged in the days of darkness, by the arts of the enemy, and by the slow changes of time in which each kind walked further down their sundered roads. Men now fear and misdoubt the elves, and yet know little of them. And we of Gondor grow like other men, like the men of Rohan, for even they, who are foes of the Dark Lord, shun the elves and speak of the Golden Wood with dread. Yet there are among us still some who have dealings with the elves when they may, and ever and anon one will go in secret to Lorien, seldom to return. Not I, for I deem it perilous now for mortal man wilfully to seek out the elder people. Yet I envy you that have spoken with the White Lady.
The Lady of Lorien, Galadriel,
cried Sam.
You should see her. Indeed you should, sir. I am only a hobbit, and gardening's my job at home, sir, if you understand me. And I'm not much good at poetry, not at making it. A bit of comic rhyme, perhaps, now and again, you know. But not real poetry, so I can't tell you what I mean. It ought to be sung. Well, you'd have to get Strider, Aragorn, that is, or old Mr. Bilbo for that. But I wish I could make a song about her. Beautiful she is, sir. Lovely. Sometimes like a great tree in flower. Sometimes like a white daffodilly, small and slender-like, hard as diamonds, soft as moonlight, warm as sunlight, cold as frost in the stars, proud and far off as a slow mountain, and as merry as any lass I ever saw in daisies in her hair in springtime. But that's a lot of nonsense, and all wide of my mark.
Then she must be lovely indeed,
said Faramir.
Perilously fair.
I don't know about perilous,
said Sam.
It strikes me that folk takes their peril with them into Lorien, and finds it there because they've brought it. But perhaps you could call her perilous, because she's so strong in herself. You could dash yourself to pieces on her like a ship on a rock, or drown yourself like a hobbit in a river. But neither rock nor river would be to blame. Now,
He stopped and went red in the face.
Yes? Now, Boromir, you would say?
Said Faramir.
What would you say? He took his peril with him.
Yes, sir, begging your pardon, and a fine man as your brother was, if I may say so. But you've been warm on the scent all along. Now, I watched Boromir and listened to him from Rivendell all down the road, looking after my master, as you'll understand, and not meaning any harm to Boromir. And it's my opinion that in Lorien he first saw clearly what I guessed sooner, what he wanted. From the moment he first saw it, he wanted the enemy's ring. Sam!
Cried Frodo aghast. He had fallen deep into his own thoughts for a while and came out of them suddenly and too late.
Oh, save me!
Said Sam, turning white and then flushing scarlet.
There I go again. Whenever you open your big mouth, you put your foot in it, the gaffer used to say to me. And right enough. Oh, there. Now look here, sir.
He turned, facing up to Faramir with all the courage that he could muster.
Don't you go taking advantage of my master, because his servants know better than a fool. You've spoken very handsome all along, put me off my guard, talking of elves and all, but handsome is as handsome does, we say. Now's a chance to show your quality.
So it seems, said Faramir, slowly and very softly, with a strange smile.
So, that is the answer to all the riddles. The one ring that was thought to have perished from the world, and Boromir tried to take it by force. And you escaped, and ran all the way to me. And here in the wild I have you, 2 halflings, and a host of men at my call, and the ring of rings. A pretty stroke of fortune. A chance for Faramir, captain of Gondor, to show his quality.
He stood up, very tall and stern, his grey eyes glinting. Frodo and Sam sprang from their stools and set themselves side by side with their backs to the wall, fumbling for their sword hilts. There was a silence. All the men in the cave stopped talking and looked towards them in wonder. But Faramir sat down again in his chair and began to laugh quietly, and then suddenly became grave again.
Alas for Boromir. It was too sore a trial,
he said.
How you have increased my sorrow, you 2 strangers from a far country, bearing the peril of men. But you are less judges of men than I of halflings. We are truth speakers, we men of Gondor. We boast seldom, and then perform or die in the attempt. Not if I found it on the highway would I take it, I said. Even if I were such a man as to desire this thing, and even though I knew not clearly what this thing was when I spoke, still I should take those words as a vow, and be held by them. But I am not such a man, or am I wise enough to know that there are some perils from which a man must flee. Sit at peace, and be comforted, Samwise. If you seem to have stumbled, think that it was fated to be so. Your heart is shrewd as well as faithful, and saw clearer than your eyes. For strange though it may seem, it was safe to declare this to me. It may even help the master that you love. It shall turn to his good, if it is in my power, so be comforted. But do not even name this thing again aloud. Once is enough.
The hobbits came back to their seats and sat very quiet. Men turned back to their drink and their talk, perceiving that their captain had had some jest or other with the little guests, and that it was over.
Well, Frodo, now at last we understand one another, said Faramir. If you took this thing on yourself, unwilling, at others asking, then you have pity and honor from me. And I marvel at you, to keep it hid and not use it. You are a new people and a new world to me. Are all your kin of like sort? Your land must be a realm of peace and content, and there must gardeners be in high honor.
Not all is well there, said Frodo. But certainly gardens are honored.
But folk must grow weary there, even in their gardens, as do all things under the sun of this world. And you are far from home and way-worn. No more tonight. Sleep, both of you, in peace if you can. Fear not. I do not wish to see it, or touch it, or know more of it than I know, which is enough. Lest peril perchance waylay me, and I fall lower in the test than Frodo, son of Drogo. Go now to rest. But first tell me only, if you will, whither you wish to go, and what to do. For I must watch, and wait, and think. Time passes. In the morning we must each go swiftly on the ways appointed to us.
Frodo had felt himself trembling as the first shock of fear passed. Now a great weariness came down on him like a cloud. He could dissemble and resist no longer.
I was going to find a way into Mordor,
he said faintly.
I was going to Gorgoroth. I must find the Mountain of Fire and cast the thing into the Gulf of Doom. Gandalf said so. I do not think I shall ever get there.
Faramir stared at him for a moment in grave astonishment. Then suddenly he caught him as he swayed, and lifting him gently, carried him to the bed and laid him there, and covered him warmly. At once he fell into a deep sleep. Another bed was set beside him for his servant. Sam hesitated for a moment, then bowing very low,
Good night, Captain, my lord,
he said.
You took the chance, sir.
Did I, sir?
Said Faramir.
Yes, sir, and showed your quality, the very highest.
Faramir smiled.
A pert servant, Master Samwise. But nay, the praise of the praiseworthy is above all rewards, and yet there was naught in this to praise. I had no lure or desire to do other than I have done.
Ah, well, sir,
said Sam.
you said my master had an elvish air, and that was good and true, but I can say this. You have an air too, sir. That reminds me of, well, Gandalf, of wizards.
Maybe,
said Faramir.
maybe you discern from far away the air of Númenor. Good night.
Frodo woke to find Faramir bending over him. For a second, old fears seized him, and he sat up and shrank away.
There is nothing to fear,
Said Faramir.
Is it morning already?
Said Frodo, yawning.
Not yet, but night is drawing to an end and the full moon is setting. Will you not come and see it? Also, there is a matter on which I desire your counsel. I am sorry to rouse you from your sleep, but will you come?
I will.
Said Frodo, rising and shivering a little as he left the warm blanket and pelts. It seemed cold in the fireless cave. The noise of the water was loud in the stillness. He put on his cloak and followed Faramir. Sam, waking suddenly by some instinct of watchfulness, saw first his master's empty bed and leapt to his feet. Then he saw two dark figures, Frodo and a man, framed against the archway which was now filled with a pale white light. He hurried after them, past rows of men sleeping on mattresses along the wall. As he went by the cave mouth, he saw that the curtain was now becoming a dazzling veil of silk and pearls and silver thread, melting icicles of moonlight. But he did not pause to admire it, and turning aside he followed his master through the narrow doorway in the wall of the cave. They went first along a black passage, then up many wet steps, and so came to a small flat landing cut in the stone and lit by the pale sky, gleaming high above through a long deep shaft. From here, 2 flights of steps led, one going on, as it seemed, up on to the high bank of the stream, the other turning away to the left. This they followed. It wound its way up like a turret stair. At last they came out of the stony darkness and looked about. They were on a wide flat rock without rail or parapet.
At their right, eastwards, the torrent fell, splashing over many terraces, and then, pouring down a steep race, it filled a smooth-hewn channel with a dark force of water flecked with foam, and curling and rushing almost at their feet, it plunged sheer over the edge that yawned upon their left. A man stood there, near the brink, silent, gazing down. Frodo turned to watch the sleek necks of the water as they curved and dived. Then he lifted his eyes and gazed far away. The world was quiet and cold, as if dawn were near. Far off in the west the full moon was sinking, round and white. Pale mists shimmered in the great vale below, a wide gulf of silver fume, beneath which rolled the cool night waters of the Anduin. A black darkness loomed beyond, and in it glinted, here and there, cold, sharp, remote, white as the teeth of ghosts, the peaks of Ered Nimrais, the white mountains of the realm of Gondor, tipped with everlasting snow. For a while Frodo stood there on the high stone, and a shiver ran through him, wondering if anywhere in the vastness of the highlands his old companions walked or slept, or lay dead, shrouded in mist. Why was he brought here out of forgetful sleep? Sam was eager for an answer to the same question and could not refrain himself from muttering, for his master's ear alone, as he thought.
Oh, it's a fine view, no doubt, Mr. Frodo, but chilly to the heart. Not to mention the bones. What's going on?
Faramir heard and answered.
Moonset over Gondor. Fair Ithil, as he goes from Middle-earth, glances upon the white clocks of old Mindolluin. It is worth a few shivers. But that is not what I brought you to see, though as for you, Samwise, you were not brought, and do but pay the penalty of your watchfulness. A draught of wine shall amend it. Come, look now.
He stepped up beside the silent sentinel on the dark edge, and Frodo followed. Sam hung back. He already felt insecure enough on this high, wet platform. Faramir and Frodo looked down. Far below them they saw the white waters pour into a foaming bowl, and then swirl darkly about a deep oval basin in the rocks, until they found their way out again through a narrow gate and flowed away, fuming and chattering, into calmer and more level reaches. The moonlight still slanted down to the fall's foot and gleamed on the ripples of the basin. Presently Frodo was aware of a small dark thing on the near bank, but even as he looked at it, it dived and vanished just beyond the boil and bubble of the fall, cleaving the black water as neatly as an arrow or an edgewise stone. Faramir turned to the man at his side.
Now what would you say this is, Unborn? A squirrel or a kingfisher? Are there black kingfishers in the night pools of Mirkwood?
It is not a bird, whatever else it may be.
Answered Unborn.
It has 4 limbs and dives manwise. A pretty mastery of craft it shows, too. What is it at that? Seeking the way up behind the curtain to our hidings? It seems we have discovered it last. I have my bow here, and I have posted other archers nigh as good marksmen as myself on either bank. We wait only for your command to shoot, Captain.
Shall we shoot? Said Faramir, turning quickly to Frodo. Frodo did not answer for a moment. Then,
No,
he said,
no, I beg you not to.
if Sam had dared, he would have said yes, quicker and louder. He could not see, but he guessed well enough from their words what they were looking at.
You know, then, what this thing is?
Said Faramir.
Come, now you have seen. Tell me why it should be spared. In all our words together you have not once spoken of your Grendel companion, and I let him be for the time. He could wait till he was caught and brought before me. I sent my keenest huntsman to seek him, but he slipped them. And they had no sign of him till now, save Anborn here, once at dusk yesterday evening. But now he has done worse trespass than only to go coney sharing in the uplands. He has dared to come to Henneth Anun, and his life is forfeit. I marvel at the creature, so secret and so sly as he is, to come sporting in the pool before our very window. Does he think that men sleep without watch all night? Why does he so?
There are 2 answers, I think.
Said Frodo.
For one thing, he knows little of men, and sly though he is, your refuge is so hidden that perhaps he does not know that men are concealed here. For another, I think he is lured here by a mastering desire, stronger than his caution.
He is lured here, you say? Said Faramir in a low voice. Can he? Does he then know of your burden?
Indeed, yes. He bore it himself for many years.
He bore it?
Said Faramir, breathing sharply in his wonder.
This matter winds itself ever in new riddles.
Then he is pursuing it. Maybe. It is precious to him. But I did not speak of that.
What then does the creature seek?
Fish.
said Frodo.
Look.
They peered down at the dark pool. A little black head appeared at the far end of the basin, just out of the deep shadow of the rocks. There was a brief silver glint and a swirl of tiny ripples. It swam to the side, and then with marvelous agility, a frog-like figure climbed out of the water and up the bank. At once it sat down and began to gnaw at the small silver thing that glittered as it turned. The last rays of the moon were now falling behind the stony wall at the pool's end. Faramir laughed softly.
Fish, he said. It is a less perilous hunger. Or maybe not. Fish from the pool of Henethanud may cost him all that he has to give.
Now I have him at arrow point,
said Anborn.
Shall I not shoot, Captain? For coming unbidden to this place, death is our law.
Wait, Anborn, said Faramir. This is a harder matter than it seems. What have you to say now, Frodo? Why should we spare?
The creature is wretched and hungry,
said Frodo,
and unaware of his danger. And Gandalf, your Mithrandir, he would have bidden you not to slay him for that reason, and for others. He forbade the elves to do so. I do not know clearly why, and of what I guess I cannot speak openly out here, but this creature is in some way bound up with my errand. Until you found us and took us, he was my guide.
Your guide?
said Faramir. The matter becomes ever stranger.
I would do much for you, Frodo, but this I cannot grant. To let this sly wanderer go free at his own will from here, to join you later if it please him, or to be caught by orcs and tell all he knows under the threat of pain, he must be slain or taken. Slain if he be not taken very swiftly. But how can this slippery thing of many guises be caught save by a feathered shaft?
Let me go down quietly to him,
said Frodo.
You may keep your bows bent, and shoot me at least if I fail. I shall not run away.
Go then, and be swift, said Faramir. If he comes off alive, he should be your faithful servant for the rest of his unhappy days. Lead Frodo down to the bank, Anborn, and go softly. The thing has a nose and ears. Give me a bow.
Anborn grunted and led the way down the widening stair to the landing, and then up the other stair, until at last they came to a narrow opening shrouded with thick bushes. Passing silently through, Frodo found himself on the top of the southern bank, above the pool. It was now dark, and the falls were pale and grey, reflecting only the lingering moonlight of the western sky. He could not see Gollum. He went forward a short way, and Anborn came softly behind him.
Go on,
He breathed in Frodo's ear.
have a care to your right. If you fall in the pool, then no one but your fishing friend can help you. And forget not that there are bowmen near at hand, though you may not see them.
Frodo crept forward, using his hands, Gollum-like, to feel his way and to steady himself. The rocks were for the most part flat and smooth, but slippery. He halted, listening. At first he could hear no sound but the unceasing rush of the fall behind him. Then presently he heard, not far ahead, a hissing murmur.
Whiteface has vanished, my precious, at last. Yes, now we can eat fish in peace. No, not in peace, precious. For precious is lost. Yes, lost. Dirty hobbits, nasty hobbits. Gollum left us. Gollum. And precious is gone. Only poor Smith, all alone. No precious. Nasty men. They'll take it. Steal my precious. Thieves. We hate them. Fish. Nice fish. Makes us strong. Makes eyes bright. Fingers tight, yes. Throttle them, precious. Throttle them all. Yes, if we get chances. Nice fish. Nice fish.
So it went on, almost as unceasing as the waterfall, only interrupted by a faint noise of slavering and gurgling. Frodo shivered, listening with pity and disgust. He wished it would stop,
and that he never need to hear that voice again. Unborn was not far behind. He could creep back and ask him to get the huntsman to shoot. They would probably get close enough, while Gollum was gorging and off his guard. Only one true shot, and Frodo would be rid of the miserable voice forever. But no. Gollum had a claim on him now. The servant was a claim on the master for service. Even service in fear. They would have found it in the dead marshes but for Gollum. Frodo knew, too, somehow, quite clearly, that Gandalf would not have wished it.
Smeagol,
He said softly.
Fish. Nice fish. Nice fish.
Said the voice.
Smeagol!
He said a little louder. The voice stopped.
Smeagol, Master has come to look for you. Master is here. Come, Smeagol.
There was no answer but a soft hiss as of intaken breath.
Come, Smeagol.
Said Frodo.
We are in danger. Men will kill you if they find you here. Come quickly, if you wish to escape death. Come to Master.
No,
Said the voice.
not nice, Master. Leaves poor Smeagol and goes with new friends. Master can wait. Smeagol hasn't finished.
There's no time.
Said Frodo.
Bring fish with you. Come.
No, must finish fish.
Smeagol,
Said Frodo desperately.
Precious will be angry. I shall take Precious, and I shall say, make him swallow the bones and choke. Never taste fish again. Come, Precious is waiting.
There was a sharp hiss. Presently, out of the darkness, Gollum came crawling on all fours, like an erring dog called to heel. He had a half-eaten fish in his mouth, and another in his hand. He came close to Frodo, almost nose to nose, and sniffed at him. His pale eyes were shining. Then he took the fish out of his mouth and stood up.
Nice, Master.
He whispered.
Nice, Hobbit. Come back to poor Smeagol. Good Smeagol comes. Let us go. Go quickly, yes. Through the trees while the faces are dark. Yes, come. Let's go.
Yes, we'll go soon,
Said Frodo.
but not at once. I will go with you as I promised. I promise again, but not now. You are not safe yet. I will save you, but you must trust me.
We must trust Master.
Said Gollum doubtfully.
Why? Why not go at once? Where is the other one? The cross-road Hobbit. Where is he?
Away up there.
Said Frodo, pointing to the waterfall.
I'm not going without him. We must go back to him.
His heart sank. This was too much like trickery. He did not really fear that Faramir would allow Gollum to be killed, but he would probably make him prisoner and bind him, and certainly what Frodo did would seem a treachery to the poor treacherous creature. It would probably be impossible ever to make him understand or believe that Frodo had saved his life in the only way he could. What else could he do? To keep faith, as near as might be, with both sides.
Come,
He said.
or the Precious will be angry. We are going back now, up this tree. Go on. You go in front.
Gollum crawled along close to the brink for a little way, snuffling and suspicious. Presently he stopped and raised his head.
Something's there.
He said.
Not a Hobbit.
Suddenly he turned back. A green light was flickering in his bulging eyes.
Master.
He hissed.
Wicked, tricksy, false.
He spat and stretched out his long arms with white snapping fingers. At that moment the great black shape of Unborn loomed up behind him and came down on him. A large strong hand took him in the nape of the neck and pinned him. He twisted round like lightning. All wet and slimy he was, wriggling like an eel, biting and scratching like a cat. But two more men came up out of the shadow.
Hold still,
Said one.
or we'll stick you as full of pins as a hedgehog. Hold still.
Gollum went limp and began to whine and weep. They tied him, none too gently.
Easy, easy.
Said Frodo.
He has no strength to match you. Don't hurt him if you can help it.
He'll be quiet if you don't. Smeagol! They won't hurt you. I'll go with you, and you shall come to no harm. Not unless they kill me too. Trust, master.
Gollum turned and spat at him. The men picked him up, put a hood over his eyes, and carried him off. Frodo followed them, feeling very wretched. They went through the opening behind the bushes and back, down the stairs and passages into the cave. 2 or 3 torches had been lit. Men were stirring. Sam was there, and he gave a queer look at the limp bundle that the men carried. He said to Frodo,
Yes. Well, no. I didn't get him. He came to me because he trusted me at first, I'm afraid. I did not want him tied up like this. I hope it will be all right. But I hate the whole business.
So do I.
said Sam.
And nothing will ever be all right where that piece of misery is.
A man came and beckoned to the hobbits, and took them to the recess at the back of the cave. Faramir was sitting there, in his chair, and the lamp had been rekindled in its niche above his head. He signed to them to sit down on the stools beside him.
Bring wine for the guests,
he said.
and bring the prisoner to me.
The wine was brought, and then Anborn came carrying Gollum. He removed the cover from Gollum's head and set him on his feet, standing behind him to support him. Gollum blinked, hooding the malice of his eyes with their heavy pale lids. A very miserable creature he looked, dripping and dank, smelling of fish. He still clutched one in his hand. His sparse locks were hanging like rank weed over his bony brows. His nose was snivelling.
Loose us! Loose us!
He said,
The cord hurts. Yes, it does, it hurts us. And we've done nothing.
Nothing, said Faramir, looking at the wretched creature with a keen glance, but without any expression in his face, either of anger, or pity, or wonder.
Nothing? Have you never done anything worthy of binding or of worse punishment?
However, that is not for me to judge, happily. But tonight you have come where it is death to come. The fish of this pool are dearly bought. Gollum dropped the fish from his hand.
Don't want fish,
He said, The price is not set on the fish, said Faramir. Only to come here and look on the pool bears the penalty of death. I have spared you so far at the prayer of Frodo here, who says that of him at least you have deserved some thanks. But you must also satisfy me. What is your name? Whence do you come, and whither do you go? What is your business?
we are lost. Lost.
Said Gollum.
No name, no business, no brushes, nothing. Only empty, only hungry. Yes, we are hungry. A few little fishes, nasty bony little fishes, for a poor creature, and they say death. So wise they are, so just, so very just.
Not very wise, said Faramir, but just. Yes, perhaps as just as our little wisdom allows.
Unloose him, Frodo.
Faramir took a small nail knife from his belt and handed it to Frodo. Gollum, misunderstanding the gesture, squealed and fell down.
Now, Smeagol,
Said Frodo,
you must trust me. I will not desert you. Answer truthfully if you can. It will do you good, not harm.
He cut the cords on Gollum's wrists and ankles and raised him to his feet.
Come hither,
Said Faramir.
look at me. Do you know the name of this place? Have you been here before?
Slowly Gollum raised his eyes and looked unwillingly into Faramir's. All light went out of them, and they stared bleak and pale for a moment into the clear, unwavering eyes of the man of Gondor. There was a still silence. Then Gollum dropped his head and shrank down until he was squatting on the floor, shivering.
He doesn't know, and he doesn't want to know.
He whimpered.
Never came here, never come again.
There are locked doors and closed windows in your mind, and dark rooms behind them, said Faramir. But in this I judge that you speak the truth. It is well for you, What oath will you swear never to return, and never to lead any living creature hither by word or sign?
Master knows.
Said Gollum, with a sidelong glance at Frodo.
Yes, he knows. We will promise, Master, if he saves us. We'll promise to it, yes.
He crawled to Frodo's feet.
Save us, lives, Master.
He whined.
Smeagol promises to Precious, promises faithfully. Never come again, never speak, no, never, no, Precious, no, no.
Are you satisfied? Said Faramir.
Yes,
Said Frodo.
at least you must either accept this promise or carry out your law. You will get no more. But I promise that if he came to me, he should not be harmed, and I would not be proved faithless.
Faramir sat for a moment and thought. Very good, he said at last. I surrender you to your master, to Frodo, son of Drogo. Let him declare what he will do with you.
But Lord Faramir,
Said Frodo, bowing.
you have not yet declared your will concerning the said Frodo, and until that is made known, he cannot shape his plans for himself or his companions. Your judgment must postpone until the morning. But that is now at hand.
Then I will declare my doom, said Faramir. As for you, Frodo, in so far as lies in me under higher authority, I declare you free in the realm of Gondor to the furthest of its ancient bounds, save only that neither you nor any that go with you here have leave to come to this place unbidden. This doom shall stand for a year and a day, and then cease, unless you shall before that term come to Minas Tirith and present yourself to the Lord and Steward of the city. Then I will entreat him to confirm what I have done and to make it lifelong. In the meantime, whomsoever you take under your protection shall be under my protection and under the shield of Gondor. Are you answered? Frodo bowed low.
I am answered, he said, and I place myself at your service, if that is of any worth to one so high and honourable.
It is of great worth, said Faramir. And now, do you take this creature, this Smeagol, under your protection?
I do take Smeagol under my protection,
said Frodo. Sam sighed audibly, and not at the courtesies of which, as any hobbit would, he thoroughly approved. Indeed, in the Shire such a matter would have required a great many more words and bows. Then I say to you, said Faramir, turning to Gollum, you are under the doom of death, but while you walk with Frodo, you are safe for our part. Yet if ever you be found by any man of Gondor astray without him, the doom shall fall, and may death find you quickly, within Gondor or without, if you do not well serve him. Now answer me, whither would you go? You were his guide, he says. Whither were you leading him? Gollum made no reply. This I will not have secret, said Faramir. Answer me, or I will reverse my judgment. Still, Gollum did not answer.
I will answer for him,
said Frodo.
He brought me to the Black Gate, as I asked, but it was impossible.
There is no open gate into the Nameless Land, said Faramir.
Seeing this, we turned aside and came by the southward road,
Frodo continued.
For he said that there is, or there may be, a path near to Minas Ithil.
Minas Morgul, said Faramir.
I do not know clearly,
said Frodo.
But the path climbs, I think, up into the mountains on the northern side of that vale where the old city stands. It goes up to a high cleft and so down to that which is beyond.
Do you know the name of that high pass? Said Faramir.
No,
said Frodo. It is called Cirith Ungol. Gollum hissed sharply and began muttering to himself. Is that not its name? Said Faramir, turning to him.
No,
said Gollum, and then he squealed as if something had stabbed him.
Yes, we heard the name once, but what does the name matter to us? Master says he must get in, so we must try some way. There is no other way to try. No.
No other way, said Faramir. How do you know that? And who has explored all the confines of the Dark Realm? He looked long and thoughtfully at Gollum. Presently he spoke again. Take this creature away, Anborn. Treat him gently, but watch him. And do not you, Smeagol, try to dive into the falls. The rocks have such teeth there as would slay you before your time. Leave us now, and take your fish. Anborn went out, and Gollum went cringing before him. The curtain was drawn across the recess. Frodo, I think you do very unwisely in this, said Faramir. I do not think you should go with this creature. It is wicked. No, not altogether wicked, said Frodo. Not wholly, perhaps, said Faramir, but malice eats it like a canker, and the evil is growing. He will lead you to no good. If you will part with him, I will give him safe conduct and guidance to any point of the borders of Gondor that he may name. He would not take it, said Frodo. He would follow after me as long as he has done, and I have promised many times to take him under my protection and to go where he led. You would not ask me to break faith with him? No, said Faramir, but my heart would, for it seems less evil to counsel another man to break troth than to do so oneself, especially if one sees a friend bound unwitting to his own harm. But no, if he will go with you, you must now endure him. But I do not think you are holden to go to Cirith Ungol, of which he has told you less than he knows. That much I perceived clearly in his mind. Do not go to Cirith Ungol.
Where then shall I go? Said Frodo. Back to the Black Gate and deliver myself up to the guard. What do you know against this place that makes its name so dreadful?
Nothing certain, said Faramir. We of Gondor do not ever pass east of the road in these days, and none of us younger men has ever done so, nor has any of us set foot upon the mountains of shadow. Of them we know only old report and the rumour of bygone days. But there is some dark terror that dwells in the passes above Minas Morgul. If Cirith Ungol is named, old men and masters of lore will blanch and fall silent. The valley of Minas Morgul passed into evil very long ago, and it was a menace and a dread while the banished enemy dwelt yet far away, and Ithilien was still for the most part in our keeping. As you know, that city was once a strong place, proud and fair, Minas Ithil, the twin sister of our own city. But it was taken by fell men whom the enemy in his first strength had dominated, and who wandered homeless and masterless after his fall. It is said that their lords were men of Numenor, who had fallen into dark wickedness. To them the enemy had given rings of power, and he had devoured them. Living ghosts they were become, terrible and evil. After his going they took Minas Ithil and dwelt there, and they filled it and the valley about with decay. It seemed empty, and was not so, for a shapeless fear lived within the ruined walls. 9 lords there were, and after the return of their master, which they had aided and prepared in secret, they grew strong again. Then the 9 riders issued forth from the gates of horror, and we could not withstand them. Do not approach their citadel. You will be espied. It is a place of sleepless malice, full of lidless eyes. Do not go that way.
Where else will you direct me? Said Frodo. You cannot yourself, you say, guide me to the mountains, nor over them. But over the mountains I am bound, by solemn undertaking to the council, to find a way or perish in the seeking. And if I turn back, refusing the road in this bitter end, where then shall I go among the elves or men? Would you have me come to Gondor with this thing? The thing that drove your brother mad with desire? What spell would it work in Minas Tirith? Shall there be 2 cities of Minas Morgul grinning at each other across a dead land filled with rottenness?
I would not have it so, said Faramir.
Then what would you have me do?
I know not. Only I would not have you go to death or torment. And I do not think that Mithrandir would have chosen this way.
Yet since he is gone, I must take such paths as I can find. And there is no time for long searching,
said Frodo. It is a hard doom and a hopeless errand, said Faramir. But at the least, remember my warning.
Beware of this guide, Smeagol. He has done murder before now. I read it in him. He sighed. Well, so we meet and part, Frodo, son of Drogo. You have no need of soft words. I do not hope to see you again on any other day under this sun. But you shall go now with my blessing upon you, and upon all your people. Rest a little while food is prepared for you. I would gladly learn how this creeping Smeagol became possessed of the thing of which we speak, and how he lost it, but I will not trouble you now. If ever beyond hope you return to the lands of the living, and we retell our tales, sitting by a wall in the sun, laughing at old grief, you shall tell me then. Until that time, or some other time beyond the vision of the seeing stones of Númenor, farewell. He rose and bowed low to Frodo, and drawing the curtain, passed out into the cave.
Frodo and Sam returned to their beds and lay there in silence, resting for a little, while men bestirred themselves and the business of the day began. After a while, water was brought to them, and they were led to a table where food was set for 3. Faramir broke his fast with them. He had not slept since the battle on the day before, yet he did not look weary. When they had finished, they stood up.
May no hunger trouble you on the road,
Said Faramir.
You have little provision, but some small store of food fit for travellers I have ordered to be stowed in your packs. You will have no lack of water as you walk in Ithilien, but do not drink of any stream that flows from Imlad Morgul, the Valley of Living Death. This also I must tell you. My scouts and watchers have all returned, even some that have crept within sight of the Moranon. They all find a strange thing. The land is empty. Nothing is on the road, and no sound of foot or horn or bowstring is anywhere to be heard. A waiting silence broods above the nameless land. I do not know what this portends, but the time draws swiftly to some great conclusion. Storm is coming. Hasten while you may. If you are ready, let us go. The sun will soon rise above the shadow.
The hobbits' packs were brought to them, a little heavier than they had been, and also 2 stout staves of polished wood, shod with iron, and with carven heads through which ran plated leather thongs.
I have no fitting gifts to give you at our party,
Said Faramir.
but take these staves. They may be of service to those who walk or climb in the wild. The men of the White Mountains use them, though these have been cut down to your height and newly shod. They are made of fair Lebethron, beloved of the wood wraiths of Gondor. And a virtue has been set upon them of finding and returning. May that virtue not wholly fail under the shadow unto which you go.
The hobbits bowed low.
Most gracious host,
Said Frodo.
it was said to me by Elrond Half-Elven that I should find friendship upon the way, secret and unlooked for. Certainly I looked for no such friendship as you have shown. To have found it turns evil to great good.
Now they made ready to depart. Gollum was brought out of some corner or hiding hole, and he seemed better pleased with himself than he had been, though he kept close to Frodo and avoided the glance of Faramir.
Your guide must be blindfolded,
Said Faramir.
but you and your servant Samwise I release from this, if you wish.
Gollum squealed and squirmed and clutched at Frodo. When they came to bind his eyes, and Frodo said,
Blindfold us all 3, and cover up my eyes first, and then perhaps he will see that no harm is meant.
This was done, and they were led from the cave to Heneth-Anun. After they had passed the passages and stairs, they felt the cool morning air, fresh and sweet, about them. Still blind, they went on for some little time, up and then gently down. At last the voice of Faramir ordered them to be uncovered. They stood under the boughs of the woods again. No noise of the falls could be heard, for a long southward slope lay now between them and the ravine in which the stream flowed. To the west they could see light through the trees, as if the world came there to a sudden end, at a brink looking out only onto sky.
Here is the last parting of our ways,
Said Faramir. If you take my counsel, you will not turn eastward yet. Go straight on,
for thus you will have the cover of the woodland for many miles. On your west is an edge where the land falls into the great vales, sometimes suddenly and sheer, sometimes in long hillsides. Keep near to the edge in the skirts of the forest. In the beginning of your journey you may walk under daylight, I think. The land dreams in a false peace, and for a while all evil is withdrawn. Fare you well, while you may.
He embraced the hobbits then, after the manner of his people, stooping and placing his hands upon their shoulders, and kissing their foreheads.
Go with good will of all good men,
he said. They bowed to the ground, and he turned, and without looking back, he left them, and went to his 2 guards that stood at a little distance away. They marveled to see with what speed these green-clad men now moved, vanishing almost in the twinkling of an eye. The forest where Faramir had stood seemed empty and drear, as if a dream had passed. Frodo sighed and turned back southward, as if to mark his disregard of all such courtesy. Gollum was scrabbling in the mold at the foot of a tree.
Hungry again already,
thought Sam.
Well, now for it again.
Said Gollum.
The wicked men. Smeagol's neck still hurts him. Yes, it does. Let's go.
Yes, let us go, said Frodo. But if you can only speak ill of those who showed you mercy, keep silent.
Nice master,
said Gollum.
Smeagol was only joking. Always forgives, he does. Yes, yes. Even nice master's little trickses. Oh yes, nice master. Nice Smeagol.
Frodo and Sam did not answer. Hoisting their packs and taking their staves in hand, they passed on into the woods of Ithilien. Twice that day they rested and took a little of the food provided by Faramir, dried fruits and salted meat, enough for many days, and bread enough to last while it was still fresh. Gollum ate nothing. The sun rose and passed overhead unseen, and began to sink, and the light of the tress in the west grew golden, and always they walked in cold green shadow, and all about them was silence. The birds seemed all to have flown away or to have fallen dumb. Darkness came early to the silent woods, and before the fall of night they halted, weary, for they had walked 7 leagues or more from Henethanoon. Frodo lay and slept away the night on the deep mold beneath an ancient tree. Sam beside him was more uneasy. He woke many times, but there was never a sign of Gollum, who had slipped off as soon as the others had settled to rest. Whether he had slept by himself in some hole nearby, or had wandered restlessly prowling through the night, he did not say. He returned with the first glimmer of light and roused his companions.
Must get up. Yes, they must.
He said.
Long ways to go still. South and east. Hobbits must make haste.
That day passed much as the day before had gone, except that the silence seemed deeper, the air grew heavy, and it began to be stifling under the trees. It felt as if thunder was brewing. Gollum often paused, sniffing the air, and then he would mutter to himself and urge them to greater speed. As the 3rd stage of their day's march grew on and afternoon waned, the forest opened out, and the trees became larger and more scattered. Great ilexes of huge girth stood dark and solemn in wide glades, with here and there among them hoary ash trees, and giant oaks just putting out their brown-green buds. About them lay long lawns of green grass, dappled with celandine and anemones, white and blue, now folded for sleep. And there were acres populous with the leaves of woodland hyacinths. Already their sleek bell stems were thrusting through the mold. No living creatures, beast or bird, was to be seen. But in these open places Gollum grew afraid, and they walked now with caution, flitting from one long shadow to another. Light was fading fast when they came to the forest end. There they sat under an old gnarled oak that sent its roots twisting like snakes down a steep crumbling bank. A deep dim valley lay before them. On its further side the woods gathered again, blue and grey under the sullen evening, and marched on southwards. To the right the mountains of Gondor glowed, remote in the west, under a fire-flecked sky. To the left lay darkness, the towering walls of Mordor. And out of that darkness the long valley came, falling steeply in an ever-widening trough towards the Anduin. At its bottom ran a hurrying stream. Frodo could hear its stony voice coming up through the silence, and beside it on the hither side a road went winding down like a pale ribbon, down into chill grey mists that no gleam of sunset touched. There it seemed to Frodo that he descried far off, floating as it were, on a shadowy sea, the high dim tops and broken pinnacles of old towers forlorn and dark. He turned to Gollum.
Do you know where we are?
He said.
Yes, master. Dangerous places. This is the road from the Tower of the Moon, master, down to the ruined city by the shores of the river. The ruined city, yes. Very nasty place, full of enemies. We shouldn't have taken men's advice. Hobbits have come a long way out of the path. Must go east now, way up there.
He waved his skinny arm towards the darkling mountains.
And we can't use this road. Oh no. Cruel peoples come this way down from the tower.
Frodo looked down onto the road. At any rate, nothing was moving on it now. It appeared lonely and forsaken, running down to empty ruins in the mist. But there was an evil feeling in the air, as if things might indeed be passing up and down that eyes could not see. Frodo shuddered as he looked again at the distant pinnacles now dwindling into night, and the sound of the water seemed cold and cruel. The voice of Morgulduin, the polluted stream that flowed from the valley of the Wraiths.
What shall we do?
He said.
We have walked long and far. Shall we look for some place in the woods behind where we can lie hidden?
No good hiding in the dark,
said Gollum.
It's in day that hobbits must hide now. Yes, in day.
Oh, come,
said Sam.
We must rest for a bit, even if we get up again in the middle of the night. There'll still be hours of dark then. Time enough for you to take us a long march if you know the way.
Gollum reluctantly agreed to this, and he turned back towards the trees, working eastward for a while along the straggling edges of the wood. He would not rest on the ground so near the evil road, and after some debate they all climbed up into the crotch of a large holm oak, whose thick branches springing together from the trunk made a good hiding place and a fairly comfortable refuge. Night fell, and it grew altogether dark under the canopy of the tree. Frodo and Sam drank a little water and ate some bread and dried fruit. But Gollum at once curled up and went to sleep. The hobbits did not shut their eyes. It must have been a little after midnight when Gollum woke up. Suddenly they were aware of his pale eyes unlidded gleaming at them. He listened and sniffed, which seemed, as they had noticed before, his unusual method of discovering the time of night.
Are we rested? Have we had a beautiful sleep?
He said.
Let's go.
We aren't and we haven't,
Growled Sam.
but we'll go if we must.
Gollum dropped at once from the branches of the trees onto all fours, and the hobbits followed more slowly. As soon as they were down, they went on again with Gollum leading eastwards, up the dark sloping land. They could see little, for the night was now so deep that they were hardly aware of the stems of trees before they stumbled against them. The ground became more broken and walking was more difficult, but Gollum seemed in no way troubled. He led them through thickets and wastes of brambles, sometimes round the lip of a deep cleft or a dark pit, sometimes down into black bush-shrouded hollows and out again. But if ever they went a little downward, always the further slope was longer and steeper. They were climbing steadily. At their first halt they looked back, and they could dimly perceive the roofs of the forest they had left behind, lying like a vast dense shadow, a darker night under the dark blank sky. There seemed to be a great blackness looming slowly out of the east, eating up the faint blurred stars. Later the sinking moon escaped from the pursuing cloud, but it was ringed all about with a sickly yellow glare. At last Gollum turned to the hobbits.
Day soon,
He said,
hobbits must safe to stay in the open in these places. Make haste.
He quickened his pace, and they followed him warily. Soon they began to climb up onto a great hogback of land. For the most part it was covered with a thick growth of gorse and whortleberry, and low, tough thorns, though here and there clearings opened the scars of recent fires. The gorse bushes became more frequent as they got nearer the top. Very old and tall they were, gaunt and leggy below, but thick above, and already putting out yellow flowers that glimmered in the gloom and gave a faint sweet scent. So tall were the spiny thickets that the hobbits could walk upright under them, passing through long dry aisles carpeted with a deep prickly mould. On the further edge of this broad hillback they stayed their march and crawled for hiding underneath a tangled knot of thorns. Their twisted boughs, stooping to the ground, were overridden by a clambering maze of old briars. Deep inside there was a hollow hall, raftered with dead branch and bramble, and roofed with the first leaves and shoots of spring. There they lay for a while, too tired yet to eat, and peering out through the holes in the covert, they watched for the slow growth of day. But no day came. Only a dead brown twilight. In the east there was a dull red glare under the lowering cloud. It was not the red of dawn. Across the tumbled lands between, the mountains of the Ethelduath frowned at them, black and shapeless below where night lay thick and did not pass away. Above, with jagged tops and edges outlined hard and menacing against the fiery glow. Away to their right, a great shoulder of the mountain stood out, dark and black amidst the shadows thrusting westward.
Which way do we go from here?
Asked Frodo.
Is that the opening of the Morgul Valley? Away over there beyond the Black Mass? Need we think about it yet?
Said Sam.
Surely we're not going to move any more today, if day it is. Perhaps not.
Said Gollum.
Yes, to the crossroads. That's the way over there. Yes, Master.
The red glare over Mordor died away. The twilight deepened as great vapors rose in the east and crawled above them. Frodo and Sam took a little food and then lay down. But Gollum was restless. He would not eat any of their food, but he drank a little water and then crawled about under the bushes, sniffing and muttering. Then suddenly he disappeared.
Wolf hunting, I suppose,
said Sam and yawned. It was his turn to sleep first, and he was soon deep in a dream. He thought he was back in the Bag End garden, looking for something, but he had a heavy pack on his back, which made him stoop. It all seemed very weedy and rank somehow, and thorns and bracken were invading the beds down near the bottom edge.
A job of work for me, I can see, but I'm so tired,
he kept on saying. Presently he remembered what he was looking for.
My pipe,
he said, and with that he woke up.
Silly,
he said to himself as he opened his eyes and wondered why he was lying down under the hedge.
It's in your pack all the time.
Then he realized, first that the pipe might be in his pack, but he had no leaf, and next that he was hundreds of miles from Bag End. He sat up. It seemed to be almost dark. Why had his master let him sleep on? Out of turn, right on till evening.
Haven't you had no sleep, Mr. Frodo?
He said.
What's the time? Seems to be getting late. No, it isn't,
said Frodo.
But the day is getting darker instead of lighter. Darker and darker. As far as I can tell, it isn't midday yet, and you've only slept for about 3 hours. I wondered what's up,
said Sam.
Is there a storm coming? If so, it's going to be the worst there ever was. We shall wish we were down a deep hole, not just stuck under the hedge.
He listened.
What's that? Thunder or drums or what is it?
Said Frodo.
It's been going on for a good while now. Sometimes the ground seems to tremble. Sometimes it seems to be the heavy air throbbing in your ears.
Sam looked around.
Where's Gollum?
He said.
Hasn't he come back yet?
No, said Frodo. There's not been a sign or sound of him.
Well, I can't abide him,
said Sam.
In fact, I've never taken anything on a journey that I have been less sorry to lose on the way. But it would be just like him, after coming all these miles, to go and get lost now. Just when we shall need him most. That is, if he's ever going to be any use, which I doubt.
You forget the marshes, said Frodo.
I hope nothing has happened to him. And I hope he's up to no tricks. And anyway, I hope he doesn't fall into other hands, as you might say. Because if he does, we shall soon be in for trouble.
At that moment, a rolling and rumbling noise was heard again, louder and now deeper. The ground seemed to quiver under their feet.
I think we're in for trouble anyhow,
said Frodo.
I'm afraid our journey is drawing to an end. Maybe,
said Sam.
But where there's life, there's hope, as my gaffer used to say, and need of victuals, as he most ways used to add. You have a bite, Mr. Frodo, and then a bit of sleep.
The afternoon, as Sam supposed it must be called, wore on, looking out from the covert until he could see only a dun, shadowless world, fading slowly into a featureless, colourless gloom. It felt stifling, but not warm. Frodo slept unquietly, turning and tossing, and sometimes murmuring. Twice Sam thought he heard him speaking Gandalf's name. The time seemed to drag interminably. Suddenly Sam heard a hiss behind him, and there was Gollum on all fours, peering at them with gleaming eyes.
Wake up! Wake up! Wake up, sleepies!
He whispered.
Wake up! No time to lose. We must go. Yes, we must go at once. No time to lose.
Sam stared at him suspiciously. He seemed frightened or excited.
Go now. What's your little game? It isn't time yet. It can't be tea time even, leastways not in decent places where there is tea time.
Silly.
Hissed Gollum.
In decent places. Time's running short. Yes, running fast. No time to lose. We must go. Wake up, Master. Wake up.
He clawed at Frodo, and Frodo, startled out of sleep, sat up suddenly and seized him by the arm. Gollum tore himself loose and backed away.
They mustn't be silly.
He hissed.
We must go. No time to lose.
And nothing more could they get out of him. Where he had been and what he had thought was brewing to make him in such a hurry, he would not say. Sam was filled with deep suspicion, and showed it. But Frodo gave no sign of what was passing in his mind. He sighed, hoisted his pack, and prepared to go out into the ever-gathering darkness. Very stealthily, Gollum led them down the hillside, keeping under cover whenever it was possible, and running, almost bent to the ground, across any open space, but the light was now so dim that even a keen-eyed beast of the wild could scarcely have seen the hobbits, hooded in their grey cloaks, nor heard them, walking as warily as the little people can. Without the crack of a twig or the rustle of a leaf, they passed and vanished. For about an hour they went on, silently, in single file, oppressed by the gloom and by the absolute stillness of the land, broken only now and again by the faint rumblings as of thunder far away, or drumbeats in some hollow of the hills. Down from their hiding place they went, and then turning south, they steered as straight a course as Gollum could find, across a long broken slope that leaned up towards the mountains. Presently, not far ahead, looming up like a black wall, they saw a belt of trees. As they drew nearer, they became aware that these were of vast size, very ancient it seemed, and still towering high, though their tops were gaunt and broken, as if tempest and lightning blast had swept across them, but had failed to kill them or to shake their fathomless roots.
The crossroads, yes,
whispered Gollum, the first words that had been spoken since they left their hiding place.
We must go that way.
Turning eastward now, he led them up the slope, and then suddenly there it was before them, the southward road, winding its way about the outer feet of the mountains, until presently it plunged into the great ring of trees.
This is the only way.
Whispered Gollum.
No paths beyond the road. No paths. We must go to the crossroads, but make haste. Be silent.
As furtively as scouts within the campment of their enemies, they crept down onto the road, and stole along its westward edge under the stony bank, grey as the stones themselves, and soft-footed as hunting cats. At length they reached the trees, and found that they stood in a great roofless ring, open in the middle of the sombre sky, and the spaces between their immense boles were like the great dark arches of some ruined hall. In the very centre 4 ways met. Behind them lay the road to the Morannon. Before them it ran out again upon its long journey south. To their right the road from old Osgiliath came climbing up, and crossing, passed out eastward into darkness. The 4th way, the road they were to take. Standing there for a moment, filled with dread, Frodo became aware that a light was shining. He saw it glowing on Sam's face beside him. Turning towards it, he saw, beyond an arch of boughs, the road to Osgiliath, running almost as straight as a stretched ribbon, down, down, into the west. There, far away, beyond sad Gondor, now overwhelmed in shade, the sun was sinking, finding at last the hem of the great slow-rolling pall of cloud, and falling in an ominous fire towards the yet unsullied sea. The brief glow fell upon a huge sitting figure, still and solemn as the great stone kings of Argonath. The years had gnawed it, and violent hands had maimed it. Its head was gone, and in its place was set in mockery a round, rough-hewn stone, rudely painted by savage hands in the likeness of a grinning face, with one large red eye in the midst of its forehead. Upon its knees and mighty chair, and about the pedestal, there were idle scrolls mixed with the foul symbols that the maggot folk of Mordor used. Suddenly, caught by the level beams, Frodo saw the old king's head. It was lying rolled away by the roadside.
Look, Sam!
He cried, startled into speech.
Look! The king has got a crown again.
The eyes were hollow and the carven beard was broken, but about the high stern forehead there was a coronal of silver and gold. A trailing plant with flowers like small white stars had bound itself across the brows as if in reverence for the fallen king, and in the crevices of his stony hair yellow stonecrop gleamed.
They cannot conquer forever,
said Frodo. And then suddenly, the brief glimpse was gone. The sun dipped and vanished, and as if at the shuttering of a lamp, black night fell.